Welcome to Inside AM, a brand new podcast series brought to you by NDT specialist Theta Technologies. Here's what to expect from this episode.
I think that whole skills piece is critical because we need people who can take those designs and get those parts off the end, and we're going to need a lot of them.
Is there still that, even just that basic knowledge of actually how you exploit this technology?
Yeah. So even at a fundamental level, that training and knowledge passing needs to happen. It's trying to tell that story to companies that this isn't something that you need to be worried about. This is something you need to be embracing, and look at all the opportunities it will give you to win extra business and hopefully you can reduce costs.
Welcome to the latest episode of Inside AM, the podcast brought to you by Theta Technologies, non-destructive testing specialists. Today I am here with Josh, head of AMUK. Couldn't really have a podcast devoted to additive manufacturing without speaking to the head of AMUK. Josh, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us.
Thank you for having me on.
First of all, so anyone that's watching this that may not be familiar with you, AMUK, what is it that you do here?
So AMUK, so Additive Manufacturing UK, is the UK's trade association for companies that are working in the additive ecosystem. So we do all the, what I could describe as the soft stuff around the edges of manufacturing, things like representation to government and helping access marketing promotion materials and what could be standards or legislation. That's essentially what our trade association does, and AMUK focuses on that additive ecosystem. So it's looking at every companies that work for everything from materials right through to people who do non-destructive testing of parts, and it's all the users and suppliers of technology, training providers, and R&D places. Yeah, that whole ecosystem.
And we're recording this podcast off the back of your most recent members forum event held in Trump over in Luton recently. Yep. Just talk to us about the concepts behind those events of bringing those members together.
Yeah, so I guess the concept behind that event is we've got two angles to it. One I say is industry intelligence, and the other is sort of networking. So networking side, all about trying to bring that community together, trying to share, if you like, knowledge and best practice, and just helping the industry learn from each other and be able to provide each other with solutions. And then on the sort of the industry intelligence side, it's about providing relevant intelligence around what's going on in the AM industry for the community. So things like what's going on in the markets, what's going on in terms of R&D, what's going on, within government, what's going on within the IP world, what's going on in the standards world. Just trying to give them sort of that relevant relevant information that they can make strategic business decisions from.
And in terms of that kind of a couple of conversations that have come up recently in terms of actually the knowledge sharing around AM seems to be pretty non-existent at the moment. Is that kind of what you're finding? Has that kind of driven you to hosting these kind of events?
Yeah, so I think there's been a real shift actually over the last 12, 24 months within the AM industry. I think previously, I think because it was a technology that was still, I say it's in infancy, but in reality it's about 30 plus years old really, but the companies that were setting up in the space were in their infancy, and therefore there was lots of IP being generated, and it just created a little bit of a culture of this is what we do. We're going to keep it to ourselves. I would say, however, there's been a shift over the last 12, 24 months at the AM industries. I guess there's been a sort of a collective realization that actually we do need to talk to each other and share a little bit about what's going on to help collectively move it all forward. We can't do it alone. It's really interesting actually coming from the manufacturing technologies side, which as AMUK sits under the MTA, and we predominantly see a lot of machine tool guys, but machine tool technologies, over 100 years old, and the companies that are working in that space, they share, they'll share their issues, they will troubleshoot together, and they will resolve things so that collectively helps the whole industry. And with AMUK, we're trying to bring that same thing across to help the AM achieve more adoption, more penetration into the manufacturing supply chain, to help to get it more widely used essentially.
And there was a lot of information shared by various companies, various members that were there yesterday.
Yeah.
What was your main takeaway from it? And did anything kind of surprise you?
I guess there were probably no surprises, but I thought probably the real presentation that jumped out at me was probably GKN Aerospace at the end of the day with Bradley talking about, just this when they started to scale up, if I need to supply this one customer this demand, this is what I'm going to need. And I think it was quite eye-opening to suddenly see those numbers actually on a page and say this is the scale actually of what we've got to achieve. I think
there were certainly a lot of worried faces in the room when we started talking about the scale of what you'd need to deliver, and this was for one customer in one industry.
Yeah. I don't think we've fully grasped yet. Actually, oh wow, this is actually how big it could get to. I think one of the really big issues with adoption currently is just the price to get into AM. It's not the same as when if you buy a machine tool and you can be talking millions to sort of set yourself up in it, especially if you're on the metal side, and consequently we've not seen the level of uptake. So it's just, I guess, part of what AMUK is trying to do is trying to create that environment in the UK where companies can get access to that, access to finance, access to expertise, access to companies so that they can, get themselves set up, get themselves adopting that technology and get it to a point where it's scaled to be able to, service the GKN or the Rolls-Royces of this world.
So we'll go into the kind of details of how we or your perception, your views on how we actually do that a little bit later on in the podcast. But so from the event, I was fortunate enough to attend, thank you for having me, there was 4 main topics of discussion that I kind of took away from that event recently. That was the economy, the skills and knowledge gap within AM. Standards was a fairly big conversation that was happening. Yeah. And then in terms of that, what we were talking about just then, how we scale it up. Yeah. So in terms of AM in general, how is AM shaping up in terms of manufacturing in the UK? How well is it doing?
I think from our perspective and from the, I guess I haven't got the hard evidence, but certainly anecdotal, it's I would say it's doing better than general manufacturing. So we're starting to see actually quite a lot of positive stories. I know there's a few that are definitely still struggling, but certainly we're starting to see a lot of positive stories about people are finding like niches or areas where they're actually generating money. And I think especially when you look at particularly on the polymer side of AM, there is a lot of companies that are starting to make cash. So I think your polymer is starting to get to that level, I guess, where it's mature enough to say it's almost starting to become industrial. I think metals, there's still a little bit of a way to go, and I think because of metals generally the parts are going to be much higher value, far more complicated, maybe going into more safety critical uses. Therefore, just the time for it to be, I guess, adopted in the same way, used in the same way, it's lagging a few years behind. I think overall, I think the story for AM in the UK is positive over the last 12 months. I think we're seeing that. We're starting to see that trend of going from just rapid prototyping to, actually this could be used in industrial production.
And in terms of sectors, what other sectors are you seeing this kind of more widely adopted now?
So I think obviously the top two, especially aerospace and automotive, they're sort of certainly seeing a lot of use for AM. But I think there's a lot going on, especially within the automotive and motorsport and space sectors. I think they're definitely starting to use it more. I think we're seeing a few companies are specifically set up actually around sort of automotive, especially on the polymer side. You've got people like the DMC at Silverstone, sort of I know Midlands 3D as well. It's got a large sort of motorsport, I guess, product range now. So those seem to be the areas that we're seeing the most growth in.
And do you get any data that kind of reflects how we're performing in relation to the rest of Europe? I know there are particular concerns around Germany's economic performance at the moment, certainly with regards to manufacturing. How are we stacking up against Europe?
So we don't. I guess there's no like actual what I'll say granular financial data. It's more of a, I guess, more with conversations and sort of a confidence rating that's the kind of data that we currently gather. In terms of how we stack up to the rest of Europe, interestingly, I'd say we're all very similar, especially sort of when you start talking about the challenges that a lot of companies are facing. It's interesting because they're the same across the board in terms of things like skills and standards and supply chain visibility. That will come up as a consistent issue. What I will say is I would say actually Spain probably are leading the way, especially in terms of the way that the sort of the maturity of the additive industry. I think that's in large part actually because essentially they set up their AMUK equivalent. They were the first in Europe to do it about 9 years ago, so an organisation called ADDIMAT. And you can really start to see sort of the positive influence that's had on sort of the whole AM community there. You go to somewhere like Formnext now and they've got loads of AM companies, all these startups that are coming and exhibiting, and I can only attribute it to the fact that this ADDIMAT organisation they've created this environment where AM is starting to thrive. It's getting the funding it needs to develop, to be used, and consequently you're starting to see that growth and those sort of companies starting to spring up and come up with all these novel technologies, and hopefully we can do the same thing with AMUK here.
I'm sure it's on the cards.
Yeah.
You mentioned skills.
Yep.
In that now there's a big discussion around skills and knowledge around AM in the UK. Now, again, in relation to the rest of other manufacturing methods, it is relatively in its infancy. There are industries, any new technology, there's going to be that knowledge gap to fill. We saw it with electric cars, where although there's discussions all the time around infrastructure, actually when it came to one oversight with electric cars was the maintenance of it, and actually the very specific skill set you need to service an electric car compared to an internal combustion engine. Is that the same with AM? Is there a real what differs that requires a completely different skill set when it comes to AM?
So I think there's probably two things I probably people will say there's more, but I think there's two main things. One is what I say design for AM. How do you design parts for AM? But then it's also what I call the process engineers who run, if you like, take a design and get it through to a manufactured part at the end. And what's I think quite often quite complicated and sort of overlooked is, as you start to dig down into AM, there's not just one type of AM. There is 7 top level types, and I'm sure as you start to dig away more within each of those 7, that you could probably split them even further. And I think we had a stat given one of our events a couple of years ago now. There was currently at one point there was 150 different types of metal machine on the market, which I almost guarantee if you start looking at them, you probably say there's 150 different processes in some way. So being able to, there'll be lots of similarities, but being able to understand the way that each different machine runs and what you have to do in terms of setup and to cool down, take down parts and how you post-process them, that's what's complicated. There's a lot of knowledge that needs to be understanding of how the different processes work to be able to really take advantage of AM. And again, going back to the sort of design side, is you need to know all the different rules, if you like, for all the different processes. So you make, when you're designing your parts, you make sure they can, make sure it's actually going to work in the process that you've selected. I mean, I think probably on the design side, you're probably best looking at getting a designer and explaining the different rules, and they'll be able to pick that up, relatively quickly. I'd imagine, probably within a couple of days, probably most good designers will go, oh, okay, that's what we can and can't do. But I think that process engineer being able to take parts and being able to, if I know someone that can run an FDM machine, that's very, very different from running a laser powder metal machine. It's not even comparable. So I think that whole skills piece is critical, because we need people who can take those designs and get those parts off the end and we're going to need a lot of them.
What do you think the answer is to kind of bridging that? I appreciate it's a very broad question, and that if you had the answer, we'd probably be there already.
Yeah.
But what do you think the answer is to filling that gap? Is the onus on the manufacturers themselves? Is it on educational institutions? Is it on organisations like yourself?
So I think it's all of the above. I think there needs to be, collaboration between all the different machine suppliers. Help if you like create that, I don't know, want for a better description, but sort of that qualification pathway. But how we take someone, whether do you take them as a sort of a graduate or a undergrad? I don't know. But how do we take them from point zero to the point where they can, run a machine? Do we have to help them to specialise? Do we have to do specific courses? So we need a agreed qualification system, and that is going to, take all the different those parties that you mentioned coming together and having a discussion. I know that there has been work gone on in Europe. There was a project called the Sector Skills for Additive Manufacturing, which was done with I think collaboration with TWI and the MTC in the UK. And I know we're certainly looking at sort of the qualification profiles that they've got off the back of that. But I would describe it as quite a closed system from what I've seen thus far, and it's actually we need to be able to make that accessible to everyone and make it really easy for people to sort of tap into. Because if we're looking at just upskilling the current workforce, it can't be a 3-year qualification. We need we need to design something which is incredibly complicated, but also needs to be really simple and flexible at the same time.
And is there just a general, in terms of education, about the use of AM? Because we're still hearing time and time again where people are designing parts and using AM, whereas actually that's probably not the best use for it.
Yeah.
Is there still that, even just that basic knowledge of actually how you exploit this technology?
Yeah. So even at a fundamental level, that training and knowledge passing needs to happen. I've certainly chatted to a few companies who could use AM, and they had a look at it 5 or 6 years ago and gone, oh nah, it's not quite where we thought it was, or they've purchased a machine and been burnt. I think kind of would be what happened, and then unfortunately they've just not come back, and the technology's it's completely changed. So it's how do we reach and educate those companies again? So I know that's part of what we're, especially at AMUK, looking to do. How can we get into that UK manufacturing supply chain, people who potentially take advantage of it, and how can we get them to either re-engage or engage for the first time and just get exposed to what the technology can do? Because I think sometimes people watch maybe like an FDM printer or an FFF printer, watch a YouTube video and go, oh, well, that's not going to do what we need it to. But, is that probably in most cases, that might not be the right technology for them. So it's trying to make something, the AM landscape, I think, is incredibly complex, and how do we simplify it so that people can easily access it, easily engage with it, and if understand, look at, I guess the idea would you want a page of A4 and someone can look at it, some sort of infographic, and go, okay, that's what it is. Really simple sort of introduction and some sort of adoption guide, I guess, for AM.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've recently done a survey, haven't you? And you've saw the event recently where you've kind of come out of it with 11 kind of action points.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting you, I appreciate I'm asking you this now, I'm not expecting you to reel off all 11.
Yeah.
But in terms of those action points, what are the key ones on there for kind of aiding that knowledge transfer and that engagement with AM?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, there's probably some actions. So if I go back just slightly, so obviously the 3 big thematic areas within sort of that came out of our survey of challenges for AM were standard skills and supply chain. And I guess under each of those areas, there are certain things that we are looking to do to sort of help, if you like, help with the adoption and help with the uptake of AM. So especially under the sort of supply chain side, I know that we're looking at doing some stuff around our show at AMUK. We get a lot of the UK manufacturing supply chain will visit MAC at the NEC, and we can that's our chance to get the technology in front of companies which often well, they don't come to look for AM, they come to look for maybe machine tools or robotics or metrology. So we've got an opportunity to get the technology in front of them. So I know we're looking at opportunities around that. I know we're starting to look at stuff around what we can do on sort of the social side of things. How can we raise the profile of members working in and around the technology? Obviously, we've got the value chain platform, which is what the company profiles are essentially put on, and it's a sort of a network, a business. I describe it as a business-to-business network, and how can we use that more to, share what the capabilities that companies have in the AM space. We're working doing some sort of smaller events, sort of post MAC. Can we do something then with companies that are interested in AM, that have expressed an interest? Can we do something and bring them together again and do some specific AM like intervention days or open days, or just to try and expose people to technology, sort of take them through the range of the technologies and what they can and can't do, and is
that key? Is that like exposing people to it? Because I get the impression there's a bit of trepidation around actually where they even start. Almost like people are scared of the technology because it's so versatile. Yeah, is it a case of let's get them exposed to it? Let's see what this is capable of.
I think that's exactly it. It's to get people like, oh, this is what it can do, this is what it can't do, and remove some of those. I guess there's probably some internal blockers. It's not going to replace a machine tool. In fact, it's probably going to complement it. It's going to give you more ways of doing stuff. It'll give you more opportunities to win business. That's probably, in reality, that's what it is going to do. And it's trying to tell that story to companies that this isn't something that you need to be worried about. This is something you need to be embracing, and look at all the opportunities it will give you to win extra business, and hopefully even reduce costs, because it will give you flexibility in areas you haven't probably hadn't realised it was going to offer.
Let's move on and talk about standards.
Yep.
It's a big. We know AM has got its own set of challenges, and a lot of them are around standards, certification, inspection processes. Where does are you finding that this is part of a process that people are not either even acknowledging or just have no understanding with whatsoever when it comes to actually validating these parts?
So I think people are keen to engage, if you like. They want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that they're following the correct processes and procedures. I think with standards, sometimes it's quite a complicated landscape to navigate. And I think in the world of AM, obviously this whole all the standards that have been written, they've sprung up in the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's been very rapidly. They've been very rapidly developed, especially when you consider normally standards take 5 years. 4 or 5 years to develop, and then they go through sort of an update cycle. And if you go back to I know I keep going back to machine tools, but they've had hundreds of years to develop those standards, whereas AM is trying to do it in a much tighter timeline. And I think you've got there's that happening. So there's been this rapid explosion of standards, and at the same time you've got a lot of companies who've I guess it was especially we've seen a lot of startups in the AM space, and what's been I guess really interesting actually is a lot of them often don't come from an engineering or manufacturing background. So I mean, I'm from an engineering manufacturing background, and I can tell you the standards it's quite a complicated landscape to sort of navigate and understand. I can imagine if you haven't got any sort of background in it, it's like, okay, what on earth is going on? Because it's a whole world of sort of numbers and acronyms which you've got to learn.
And are those startups aware of the need for the standards?
Yeah, often, very often. If you like, they're aware, especially they're aware of things like the top level, the ISO 9000 ones, the ISO 14000 standards. But then there's this the drilling down standards, especially like how do I test and prove my part? How do I do that post processing? What standard do you have to follow in terms of in terms of operating procedure for a specific machine? So that it's those kind of, I guess, more on in the factory, just general operating standards that are, if you like, sometimes just a bit more sort of difficult to understand. What exactly have we got to do? What have we got to get in place? What have we got to get set up? So certainly, we're starting to see companies that are interested in and want to engage in it, but it just like anything, it just takes a bit of time to really get your head around it, I think.
In terms of the manufacturers, okay, there is still a lack compared to traditional manufacturing methods. There is still a lack of those standards. How are you finding that manufacturers are overcoming that lack of standards at the moment, or lack of established standards?
Well, no, so I think I'd say the established standards are there.
Are they the same? Do they transfer from traditional to?
So there has been I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but there's over 100 AM specific standards. A lot of them are, if you like, just learning through trial and error at the moment.
Yeah.
Because there is no, if you like, central document to follow. This is what you have to do, and often I think this is one of the things with AM is one day you can be printing some widget which goes on a plane. The next is you're printing some orthotic part which is going to the NHS, and often the way that you might print one part is very different to the next part, and the way that you might package the whole sort of all of them together within the environment might be slightly different. So it takes there's essentially trial and error to work out what the rules are and what you can and can't do with different technologies. So yeah. I think a lot of companies are that's sort of just what's the way it's happened currently, and I'm sure as it matures, it will get more. Okay, this is the processes that we follow.
And let's talk about the final topic just briefly, which is about scale. Clearly, this technology has that huge potential for scale. It's not quite there yet, but as you mentioned there, we're kind of restricted at the moment to printing those one-off parts or those parts that are kind of limiting the amount of parts that need to be welded together to create their final part. Talk to me about the potential of scale with AM and what's, if anything, well, we know something is holding it back.
Yeah.
What's the potential there and why are we finding that scale AM has not really kind of taken off yet?
So, I think the scale or the opportunity for AM is massive. I think I think the original predictions where it was going to be 5% of total global manufacturing, but I don't know if that prediction still reigns true, but I think it's actually far more than that in reality. I know at the recent event, obviously GKN mentioned about this. If we're just servicing this one customer, this is these are the scale kind of what we're going to need. And eventually, he's talking about this, a factory the size of a football field, which wouldn't have any pathways; it would just be packed full of machinery. So that starts to give an indication of wow, you just to service one aerospace customer, that's how many machines you're going to need. I think was it over 40 years. I can't remember, but it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening, yeah. But and when you start to think of things like, well, if we start to have self-driving, let's say self-driving cars and they're electrified, well, electric cars you want them to be as light as possible, and suddenly if they're self-driving, well, we don't have to worry about maybe the safety system so much because they probably end up being safer than human drivers. So, well, how should we design it then? So suddenly you have a really very different design of car, and suddenly AM might suddenly come into its own of like, well, actually we can make a very lightweight chassis because of AM. Oh, how many cars are going to have on the road? The opportunities I think are huge for AM. So. Yeah, I think there's a potentially, maybe not right now in the corner, but certainly in a few times' time, there's potentially we could need far more than what we've got at the moment. I guess in terms of what's holding it back, it's I guess the finance to purchase a lot of these machines. It's expensive. It's not always cheap to get into AM. Especially again looking at the metal side, it can be really pricey. And I mean, obviously to touch on the skills, you're going to need a lot of people to use. If you've got all these machines, you need a lot of personnel who can use it effectively and get the most out of it. And if you just haven't got it, you just cannot use it. So it's having all those skilled individuals as well, I think, in place to really take advantage of it.
This podcast has been developed as an educational and informative resource that delves deep into the world of additive manufacturing with experiences from those individuals making it happen. If you've got a story you think those working in AM should know, feel free to reach out to our team. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and connect with us on LinkedIn at Theta Technologies Limited. See you next time.